I am Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is about the books that I read for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book Radio Free Olympia, no other than Mr. Jeffrey Dunn. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Jeffrey, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
I can do that, Daniel. Thank you for having this chat with me and sending it out into the broadcast ether world. I'm Jeffrey Dunn. I grew up and oh, there's my book. Very cool. I grew up in the Rust Belt of Appalachia near Pittsburgh. And after I got married, we moved and taught for 41 years, and we moved to the Pacific Northwest and in near Elma, Washington, Olympia, Washington, and taught there for 9 years. And then we moved to Spokane because we were looking for the sun. Spokane's known as the Children of the Sun, as the A Salish translation, depending upon who you talk to. I have a PhD in English literature and culture studies, but I spent my working life where I earned a paycheck. I spent that doing teaching secondary, especially kids who struggle with reading and writing. But I'm a born storyteller. And so that's once I retired, I could devote myself to that full time. And my experience on the Olympic Peninsula for 9 years is the genesis, the impetus, the setting, the place, the spirit of Radio Free Olympia.
So, Mr. Jeffrey Dunn, thank you so much for sharing your talent to the world. And what is the central premise of Radio Free Olympia?
Radio Free Olympia, I like to think of it's my attempt to do Joyce's Ulysses for the Olympic Peninsula. Living there for 9 years, especially the very first night that I spent out on my porch, the nature is ubiquitous. I was overwhelmed by the sound of frogs. I looked out and it was darkness all the way to Canada. It was darkness all the way to Oregon. It was both a frightening but a transcendental experience right off the bat. And then I spent 9 years changing from the East Coast, cut all the trees down, Presbyterian boy that I was taught to be, and learned that nature was bigger than me, and that as you probably have some sense of on near Vancouver, Washington, where you're from, you're very small, and you need to adjust in some way if you are actually responding to the world that you live in, because it's not man-made, because it's very different. And that's kind of the impetus. That's not the characters, and we can get into that and the complications and all of that. So I'll turn it back to you, and you can refocus me.
Certainly. So, Mr. Jeffrey, in what ways does the setting of the Olympic Peninsula influence the narrative?
Well, as I said, it's everything. Um, I write anti-novels. Everything since starting in the 1850s really should be anti-novels, because that was kind of the height of the novel. But most readers read traditional novels. It's how they're taught to read in high school and so forth and so on. But an anti-novel is just something that does something different, and mine is long-form fiction of place. So whatever place the novel is in, I'm going to absorb everything I can about that, and what I can't get off of from direct experience, I get from Google Earth, I get from research, I get from whatever. Since I had a chance to live on the Olympic Peninsula, there was the impetus. It was all about place, and then the characters come from that, and the conflicts come from that because they're realistic. Even if Radio Free Olympia is a very magical, realistic book, so the magic in my mind is realistic to the Olympic Peninsula.
So, Mr. Jeffrey, how does the title Radio Free Olympia or Olympia relate to the story's content?
Yes, there's two characters. Um, all of the odd chapters are third person narration, and they're focused on a young man named Petter. And it's Petter, not Peter, although you can pronounce it Peter if you want to. It's Petr because it comes from, he was a foundling and he was found in a petroleum barrel washed up on the beach. So there's where he gets his name from. He for his mother, his itinerant logger, not even adoptee, but the person who raises him, gives him a transistor radio for a mother. And so his mother tongue is radio. And as he grows and as he leaves, he finds himself in what's called the Hood Canal region, and he's got a pirate radio transmitter in a backpack. And he starts walking ostensibly home, although home doesn't end up being what the reader is, or even Petter at that point imagines it's going to be. And he just starts walking, and his motivation is he wants to broadcast the spirits of the Olympic Mountains. And so he starts to walk a trail, which takes him past Anderson Mountain and the Anderson Glacier and down into what's called the Enchanted Valley. But he has many, many encounters and many broadcasts with historical figures, people who have passed away, Native American folklore figures. And as he walks, all of those voices then become part of the book. So he's broadcasting the Olympic Peninsula. The design is to not have the characters speak, although they do. It's to have the place speak. So the fictional problem to solve is, how do you make a place speak? And the characters are simply a manifest different aspects, facets of a diamond, if it were, as it were, of the place, in this case, the Olympic Peninsula.
So, Mr. Jeffrey, what role does the pirate radio station play in the community depicted in the novel?
It's their voice to the world. They don't necessarily think of it that way, but that's what it becomes, and that's what the novel is. It's their attempt. A lot of it sort of unwittingly, in a sense, but it's my attempt. Let's put it that way, to speak of a world that's still wild, that's pre-Christian. Although the female character, Bay, who is running a cranberry farm and a woman's roadhouse called on the Hump Tulips River. It's called Wild Sisters. She's going to pick all of this up, but all of this is essentially trying to speak to the world that we're in crisis, that the changes that are taking place are polluting, poisoning, draining us spiritually. And this is the response of a place that still has, if you visit and walk the Olympic Peninsula, still has that energy. If you're like a tuning fork and tuned into it, I think you can imagine this place saying, "What the hell? Stop! Just stop!"
Certainly. So, how does Peter's upbringing shape his connection to nature and indigenous cultures?
Petter's not connected to the indigenous cultures except through, again, he's the broadcaster. He's the Daniel, we'll call him,
Yes.
and he's the one who is acting as this technological conduit. Um, that's bringing this out, because he grew up feral. He's got this mother who's a transistor radio, and he's got this father who is unemployable, who lives in a an old logging railroad car that he pulls into the middle of nowhere. I tend to write about places that are really cut off from the mainstream of America or mainstream of civilization, so the characters can develop in ways that are more interesting. So I mean, there's a description of his baptism, and he's baptism his baptism is by sound, not by water. Although in the Olympic Peninsula, there certainly is no shortage of water, and yeah, uh, that's what he brings to this. Um, and then the spirits, like the folklore characters, the Kushtakas. Kushtakas are beings that are half human, half otter. Um, a character who's essentially there was a man, John Huseldonk, who was the Iron Man of the Ho River. He was called, and he's a character who's passed away, and he's become essentially a cougar at this point. And they walk together and they talk, and it all becomes this very magical, realistic expression of of the native culture, because that's indigenous. And Raven has a big part in this. Who's very very much the one of Native American culture, but I'm not Native American. He's a very philosophical. He's got his own plot. Let's put it that way. Um, but he's able to oversee the entire novel and fly above it and comment on what's going on, and provides transitions, because with so many voices, transitions are pretty important. How do we get from
Certainly,
this to that? Well, Raven will tell you. He just tells you straight out.
definitely. So, what challenges do the characters face in preserving their way of life?
Yes. Uh, Petter's just kind of a cipher who just does things in a way, but his challenge is simply survival. He's eating, not freezing to death, making his way through the Olympic Peninsula, which he doesn't know exactly where he's going, but he's just sort of being guided by spirit, so to speak, and the different feelings and spirits and folklore and whatever he comes across. Basket Woman's another folklore character who he comes across. Um, and repeat your question there.
What
I got
challenges do the
Oh,
characters?
challenges. Yes,
Yes,
Bay. On the other hand, Bay's father was grew up in a French convent. Her mother's Native American,
yes.
and they both pass away. And so she's her entire piece is first person. Um, First person. It's a poetry journal, but it reads like, you don't have to be put off by that, because it looks like poetry, but it reads simply as narrative. Um, and she's essentially creating a convent for battered women and lost people, especially women. And the challenge for me them is to bring the two of them together, which they do. Eventually that sort of thing happens. So she's the feral Christian spirit, and Bay's just open mic transmitter.
Interesting indeed, Mr. Jeffrey. So, what would be your advice for those people out there want to write their own novel?
Well, first of all, you just have to sit down and write. Um, I can't give advice in the sense that I'm no how-to book. I can only speak to the way this works for me. Um, and in terms of creativity, most people read it. Most people will tell you their advice is to read in their own genre. So you really know, what it is, whether you're writing romance, historical fiction, all of that. And yeah, those are things to know, but that's fairly readily discernible, I think. I read widely in the arts and the sciences. I try and pull in as much information as possible because I just have a lot more to draw on. Be a sponge. Be aware. Take walks in the world. Take walks. The novel that I've just started right now, I go into downtown Spokane in the Central District and I walk there. That's urban, but it's still a setting, and I absorb the buildings, absorb the houses, um, the sounds, the smells, everything as much as you possibly can. And then you start to write. Uh, and you can, if you're a disciplined person, I mean, you can outline if you want. I don't. But whatever works, you know, is to do that because you have a story to tell. You feel it in you because that's why you're doing it. And so just give it a whirl because you'll learn, you'll grow as you write, and you'll discover things about yourself that you didn't know were there.
Certainly. So, Mr. Jeffrey, what will be your short-term and long-term goals in writing?
Wow. Well, I'm 68 years old. So everything, I don't have long-term goals because I don't have a long time to live. Um, that ticking clock is something that's always there, sort of sitting on my shoulder.
Hmm.
But short-term goal right now is and it's almost a medium-term goal too, because what I want to do is write a radio-free Olympia for the Spokane area, because Spokane's a completely different setting with a whole different set of folklore, history, geology. There's so much that's here that doesn't doesn't get spoken of, doesn't get broadcast, so to speak. So I've got my two characters. I'm about 20 pages in. Um, and I want to pull all that together and use a lot that I learned from Radio Free Olympia. My other two books in the middle of those two are a little simpler, so they're not so complicated. Um, and then see how long my brain holds out, medium term, and do promotions like this. Talk to as many Daniels as I can, just because it's fun. It's
Yes.
fun to do. My son will tell you I'm a storyteller, and once he gets started, he won't shut up. And so I try and not go overboard, but boy, it's fun just to riff, just to make stuff up,
Yes.
just to have life be more interesting. My life be more interesting, at least in my imagination, than it is in the real world.
Mr. Jeffrey, good luck to your goals, and we are looking forward for more books to come. So, how did you balance realism with magical or folkloric elements in Radio Free Olympia?
That's an interesting question. Um, the the book, as I first started to write it, was simply being an open channel to the Olympic Peninsula, and so it my experience, I just let it be the driver, and I tried to make every sentence, um, every paragraph, every chapter interesting. This was 10 years ago, um, and probably longer than 10 years ago, maybe 15. Um, and then that became what I call Raven likes to use the word cacophony because cacophony also goes with him going caw, caw, caw. And that became a big, giant pile of interesting pieces. And I set it apart. And then when I retired, I dug back into it and completely rewrote it and dropped 50 pages at the beginning and added 50 pages. And I found this is what one thing that I can tell, writers is don't be afraid of a developmental editor, because I always have one once I get the what I think is a finished manuscript. but you've got to choose your developmental editors very, very carefully. And so for Radio Free Olympia, my developmental editor is Sky Lloyd, and Sky, I love Sky. She's very cool. Her specialty is nonfiction books. I didn't pick a person who does fiction. And Sky used to be a park ranger, and she lives in Seattle, and she's walked all the trails. And what I needed from her was to go through and walk the trails in the book, tell me how realistic my descriptions were, let me know about time, things like time frames. Because when I wrote this, wasn't paying any attention to the 1930s, because the Bear, who's Petter's, the guy who raises him, he's born in the 30s, but then it goes all the way to the 1980s. So there's a stretch of time, and all that stuff has to go back and become more realistic. So with her help and her saying, well, what the heck, this doesn't ring right. Does this radio broadcast, this is the wrong time period, isn't it? So there was lots of rewriting, just to get the time frames to make sense, to make the transitions, to cut some things, delete some things. You go, that was fun while I wrote it, but it doesn't really work overall. So when you get to the end, it as one reviewer said, this is an amazing book, Radio Free Olympia. There's so much going on, and I wanted to see whether you could actually get to the end and have this make sense, and damned if you didn't. So I was very happy about that.
Definitely. Congratulations, Mr. Jeffrey. So, to wrap up our discussion for today, how does the structure of the novel contribute to its overall themes and messages?
Well, I think the structure is a multiplicity of voices. It's a place where one voice can't possibly speak for a place. So you need voices, you need gendered voices. For better or for worse, we're gendered, although we're on a whole continuum across whatever we're going to define gender as. We have different cultures, different histories. You need a symphony to actually accurately, realistically represent a place, including the imagination of that place, and all of that. The difficulty is trying to get all of that symphony to cohere. That's the difficulty. So if you're a reader who wants to take this book on, be prepared. I tell people, I think of it like a box of chocolates. Read a chapter, maybe two, just because you want to. I'm dyslexic. I write really short chapters. So it's not like you're reading 10, 20 pages at a time. They're really, really short. And you read one, you read two, let it sit, come back to it. The next day, read a couple more, come back to it, read one, come back to it, and just roll with it and let it be like a radio broadcast that you tune into every day. And I think you'll have a mind-blowing time. That's the goal.
Mind-blowing.
Mind-blowing.
Lots of twists and turns, people. So, Mr. Jeffrey Dunn, thank you so much for sharing your talents to the world. And as I said, we are looking forward for more novels to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Oh, well, there's Radio Free Olympia that was published in 2023. Last year in June, Wildcat, an Appalachian romance, which comes out of my upbringing back in the Rust Belt of Appalachia. And then May 6th of this year, Whiskey Rebel. And Whiskey Rebel takes place in the Columbia Basin. All about somebody who wants to make tax-free whiskey and his shell-shocked buddy from the Iraq War.
Interesting. Interesting, Mr. Jeffrey. And tune in for next week because Mr. Jeffrey and I, we're going to talk about this latest book of his. So, Mr. Jeffrey, thank you for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Daniel. It's nice to meet you.
More to come, people. See you soon.